Welcome back to the studio, everyone. Well, if you remember, last time round we were looking at the various equipment that you need to be able to make models. Today we're going to be looking at paint. We're going to be looking at a variety of different kinds that you can use, looking at some of the pros and cons of them, looking at some of the clear coats that you can use to seal your model, looking at some of the products that you can use to work with decals, and looking at some of the products that you can use for landing lights. So why don't we get into it? Let's have a look at some paint. Okay, let's talk about paint. There's a wide variety of paint out there on the market. Broadly, they break up into three categories now. There's the pure acrylics, there's the lacquer-based paint, and then there's the acrylic lacquer, which is kind of solvent-based acrylic paint. The acrylic paint, pure acrylic paint, has less harmful fumes and that sort of thing. So if you're in an environment where you don't have super amounts of ventilation, you might be best off going with a pure acrylic paint. The acrylic lacquer paint goes on very smoothly. It flows well through the airbrush, leaves a good finish. Has some fumes, so you might want to be careful about that if you're in an environment without adequate ventilation. Something to watch out for, and obviously always wear a mask when you're spraying. And then you've got the paint that's at the pure acrylic end of the scale. Lots of solvents. They go on very smoothly. You get a great finish, but they take a bit more cleanup and the fumes are a problem. So really those are the kind of decisions that you're going to be making. Now, whichever paint you choose, and I'm the worst for not doing this, if you stick with that same type of paint, you'll have far fewer issues with your airbrush clogging. I skip between various brands of paint depending on the purpose that I'm using them for. I use a lot of Tamiya-based paint, super easy to use, thins down nicely, sprays well. For the most part, the colours don't clog. Find that really good. I also use some Vallejo paint. I mostly use the regular Vallejo for brushing. It's very thick for putting through an airbrush, but the Vallejo Air, which is specially formulated to use with airbrushes, actually flows very smoothly through the airbrush. No really bad smells coming off it, so it's a really good one if you're in an environment where you can't open the windows so easily and that sort of thing. MIG Ammo also make this atom paint. I've had mixed results with this. I find that this clogs quite a lot. It's okay for brushing. I'd give this one a miss. I don't want to downplay it because I know a lot of people have really good experiences with it. I personally haven't. So the Vallejo stuff is good, the Tamiya stuff is good. I'd say that the Tamiya stuff is slightly harder wearing. Now I know that might sound a little bit strange for a model because it's not as though you're going to be like carrying it around with you and that sort of thing. But during the weathering process, which we'll cover later on, you're going to be rubbing on the model a little bit. There's going to be some solvents going down onto the model. And I find that this can stand up to that a little bit better. I find that sometimes the Vallejo stuff comes off. So if you're going for pure acrylic, Tamiya is a good option. The downside of Tamiya is they have a fairly limited color range, so you end up having to mix some colors yourself. But it's not the end of the world, and they have, for the most things that you're going to be making, Tamiya has an appropriate color. Then if you're moving into the hybrid acrylic stuff, so this is your sort of lacquer-based acrylic, I really like AK. The AK Real Color Paint is absolutely superb. Now their marketing spiel on this is that they actually identically match the colors to the real colors. That's where the real color thing comes in. I think that's good. As soon as you've applied any sort of wash to it, though, it's going away from those from the actual real colors. So how important that is, I don't know, but it does leave a superb finish, very hard wearing, really, really good. Leave it to dry even for just half an hour or so, and you can put pretty much any weathering material over it. They changed the style of them late last year from being these little jars, which were very much like the Tamiya jars, to these little bottles instead. Now, the drawback of these, if you store them like I do, where I store them in a drawer and they're all end on, out of the box, they all just have black lids here. These ones are just straight out of the box. Yeah, they're just black lids and they all look the same. What I do when I first open them up is I spray the lid, the color that the paint is going to be. And that makes them easy to identify from looking at them in the drawer. Just a little tip for you there, something useful to be able to do. And then another paint that I use this Outlaw paint. It's relatively difficult to come by in the US. Sprays beautifully though, really, really good. I get mine through a retailer in Arkansas. Really good, but a bit of a lead time on it. So, you know, great paint, not so widely available. So I think really what you're kind of looking at is a choice between these. I think if I were given the choice, I'd go with the AK stuff, but wear a mask when you're using it. Make sure you have adequate ventilation. Okay, let's talk about some shiny stuff now. So metallic paints. Metallic paints are a slightly different beast again. Tamiya do make metallic paints. Now, I don't think the metallic finish you get from them is as good as a lacquer-based metallic paint. I just find the grain size is quite large. They're brushable, which is a good thing, but I find the grain size quite large. If you spray paint, say, a P51 Mustang in bare metal using Tamiya paint, it kind of looks like it's been painted rather than being metal. Now that needn't necessarily be a problem, but I think there's better options out there. I use the Tamiya-based metallic paints for details within the cockpit, you know, controls and that sort of thing, instrument panels, maybe the odd bit of painted landing gear here and there. But I tend to give this stuff a miss. It's widely available though, and again, it has the benefit that I was talking about with the flat colors of not lots of toxic chemicals, not lots of bad smells, so you don't necessarily need the same kind of ventilation with the Tamiya paint. Okay, my go-to metallic paint is AK Extreme Metal. The grain size in this is just superb. It sprays beautifully. Really, really nice metallic finish. You can genuinely see the difference between the various colors. This one is steel. It gives a slightly duller metallic look. They do an aluminum, a polished aluminum, a chrome. Those ones come up to a much higher shine. Really, really good. Lots and lots of fumes though. Make sure that you wear a mask, and that's true of anything that you're spraying. Make sure you've got some ventilation, maybe put a window fan or something like that. Certainly open the windows while you're doing it. Or maybe do it at the end of the day so you're not sitting in the fumes all day. But really, really good. Downside of this, it's not brushable. You have to airbrush it. So if you need to touch up some areas, if you've got small areas that need to paint, maybe like the pneumatic cylinders in the landing gear, this isn't going to work for that, but really, really good option for large areas of painting. My other go-to paint is this Mr. Metal color. Now this is a little bit harder to come by. Lots of online stores sell it. Really, really good. I don't airbrush this, although it does airbrush beautifully. I use this for brush painting. So if I'm doing, you know, again, the sort of the pneumatic cylinders on suspension, on a landing gear of an aircraft, really, really good. This chrome one is interesting as well, because once you paint it on, let it dry, and then you can take a Q-tip and you can buff it to a high shine. Really, really good. Other options out there as well. I use some of this Outlaw paint as well. Hard to come by in the US. I find it to be good. From the metallic range, it's not quite as good in my opinion as the AK Extreme Metal, but it's still a really good choice. If you're in Australia, this is a really good option for you. It's made there and you can get hold of it easily from the website there. Super paint. Okay, we're going to talk about clear coats in a moment, but let's talk about something else just before we do that. Gloss versus matte paint. Now, if you're brush painting, the gloss paint does become relevant and will be important to you. If you're airbrush painting, then I would always go with the matte version of the paint rather than the gloss version of the paint. I don't rely on the sheen of the paint to provide the final sheen on the model. I use a clear coat to do that. I find that the flat versions of colours, be it the white here or the black, the flat versions spray a lot better, they clog less, you get a more consistent finish, particularly with thinner. I find that with the gloss ones, once you thin the paint, you can end up with variable sheen coming off it. So I prefer to just spray flat paint and then use a clear to either make it gloss or matte. And speaking of clears, let's talk about those now. Okay, clears. I use a huge variety of different clears on my models depending on the finish that I'm looking for. A lot of military aircraft, particularly US Navy aircraft, modern era things, are actually a flat finish, so very matte. I use this MIG Ammo Lucky Varnish. I find it to be absolutely superb. The matte version comes in two versions, the matte and the ultra matte. I like to use the ultra matte for applying a layer to take different treatments. So if I'm going to put a wash onto something, I'll do it with the ultra matte first. If I'm going to do some oil paint rendering, I'll use the ultra matte. It has a bit more tooth to it, so when you're actually applying those things, they just stick a little bit better. I think though, for the final finish on the model, the ultra matte is actually a little bit too matte. Needn't necessarily be the case if you're making something like an F117 Nighthawk, where they are very flat, but even for a normal Navy aircraft at scale, the ultra matte looks a little bit too flat. So I tend to use the matte for the finish. It has a little bit less tooth. You can just use this. The matte would be absolutely fine, even for the oil paint rendering and that sort of thing, which we'll be covering later on. But even for things like that, this would work, but the ultra matte is just that little bit better. Okay, so let's talk about the other end of the scale, the gloss end of the scale. Okay, there's a few different products that I like to use in this area. I have the glossy Lucky Varnish. I'll be honest, I don't use that very much. I think there are better glossy options out there. And speaking of this, I love this Alclad Aqua Gloss Clear. Fantastic. It's a water-based paint, so it doesn't interfere with any lacquer-based stuff that you might have put down. Won't interfere with the metallic paints that you've added, but provides a really good seal. In terms of the level of shine, it's a decent level of shine. I don't really rely on this for shiny. With this one, this is basically just giving me a layer to put my decals onto. So even if the model's going to be matte at the end, I put the gloss on so that you don't get too much silver and you get a really nice smooth layer. So this is the kind of interim finish that I use. So in terms of the order that I would do things in, I'd paint with the paint that I was talking about before. I'd then put the ultra matte onto it. I'd then do some of my oil paint rendering and some of the panel line treatments and such like. Once I'd finished with that and that had all dried, I'd then go over it with some of this Aqua Gloss Clear. This then seals all that in, gives me a smooth surface for the decals to go onto. Once the decals are all set in place, I'll then use another layer of this to seal in the decals. Then I'll do the final levels of oil paint rendering, etc. And then at that point, once all that is sealed again, so again seal that in with another layer of this, and then we're going for the final finish, which we're either going with a matte, or if we want it to be glossy, let's say we're doing something like a Thunderbird or a Blue Angels or aircraft or something like that, where they're super shiny, really polished and looked after. I then use this product that's amazing, Intermediate Gauzy Agent from AK. This stuff is absolutely superb. Sprays from the airbrush, it goes on very smoothly. You can actually put it on pretty wet. You don't want it to be like sort of dripping off it, but you can put it on pretty wet, and this will give you a superb level of shine. Really, really nice. Too shiny for most in-service aircraft, but absolutely fantastic for those show type aircraft, the display team type aircraft. Really, really good. For an intermediate sort of level, so we're talking here about early Tomcats were slightly glossy, some of those type of aircraft. I like to use this stuff, Tester's Dull Coat. Now this is actually a matte finish. It's not a very good matte finish. That's what I'm going to say. I'm not meaning to downplay the product like that. For me, this is a sort of low satin sheen paint, the finish that goes on it. So it's not matte like the Lucky Varnish. It won't make things go matte, but it will take some of the shine off or add a little bit of shine in. So I really like this. The strength of this product is perhaps the weakness of it, that it isn't as matte as it could be. But I really like it. I find that it works really, really well. So that's your clears. Those are the clears that I use. Let's have a look at some of the other products that I'm using. Okay, so I spoke about decals. Some important things with decals. So what you're really looking for with a decal is to get a sort of painted on look. On the real aircraft or tank, these things are painted on. They're not stickers that stick on. With a decal, it can look a bit like a sticker, and that's where these things come in, Microsol and Microset. Now, Tamiya does a version as well, Mark Fit Strong. That stuff's really good too. I tend to lean more towards microset and microsol. So let me talk about these for a minute. When you're applying your decals, you soak them in water and then they slide off the backer. You want to be able to move them around to get them into place, and that's where the microset comes in. Paint this onto the surface before you put the decals down, and then you can slide them around with your finger a little bit, get them to move around. Really, really good. Once you've got them in place though, you want them to sort of suck down into the surface. You want them to disappear into any panel lines and that sort of thing. And that's where this microsol comes in. You've got to be pretty careful with this. What this does is it kind of melts the decal a little bit and really gets them to set down into place. The way in which you use this, both of these are applied with a paintbrush. Get some on the paintbrush, soak the decal with it, and then it'll conform to the surface. Be a bit careful though, once you've applied this, leave it to fully dry out. Don't keep painting at it and that thing because the decal can fall apart. But this is what you can use for that real painted on look. Looks fantastic. Now, when you make models, you might have that old kit that you found at the thrift store, or that one that's been in the stash forever that you've been looking to make, and you get it and you start trying to get the decals off and they just start falling apart on you. And we've all been there. I've been commissioned to build kits for people from very old kits, and the decals just fall apart on them. And that's where this stuff comes in, made by the same people who make the microset and microsol, but this is liquid decal film. What you do with this is you paint it onto the decal before you soak it in water, let it dry, and then this provides another layer on the decal. I find this to be really good with old decals. With newer decals, you don't really need it. With some trumpeter decals, they can be very thin, and this can address that issue. It can make them much easier to use, much less likely to fall apart. A good weapon to have in your arsenal. What I tend to do is try out one of the decals when I first start the model, something that's inconspicuous, and I get a feel for how difficult the decal is going to be to use. If I think they're pretty thin, I might do one of them like that, but then the rest of them get this liquid decal film. This is also useful if you're making your own decals, because you can paint this over them to give them a bit more robustness. So these are superb materials to be using for decals. Let's talk about a couple of other products that I find to be really, really useful. A lot of times with models, you get some clear lenses that come with them. So these might be for landing lights, they might be for navigation lights, this kind of thing. Now the plastic parts that come in the kit can be good, but often that plastic is very hard and it doesn't quite conform into the space properly. That's where these things come in. So there's a couple of products here. Mr. UV, this is a filler, but it's a clear UV activated filler. You put it into the area that you need it, and then expose it to UV. It can be as simple as putting it outside, or if you've got a UV torch or a flashlight, you can shine it on it. I find this to be really good. It can be a little bit difficult to use. I find I end up squeezing a bit out and then using a toothpick to put it into place. In the last few weeks though, I've encountered this stuff, Decal Art Media liquid glass. I find this to be absolutely fantastic. It's got a very narrow point applicator on it. And you can squeeze this out, and so this can take the place of some of the landing lights. You don't really even need to use a toothpick with it. You can just squeeze it straight from the bottle. I also like to use this on instrument panels to use for the glass. So, you know, if I'm using a decal, the decal will go on and this will go over to simulate the glass. Really, really good, really easy to use, dries super clear. I find this to be indispensable. They're absolutely superb for navigation lights. If you're not using it already, this is a really, really good option. I love it. Okay, well, I hope this session has been useful for you today. I hope it's given you some insight into the various types of paint that you can use on your models, giving you just some of the thought process and the decision process that you might go through for selecting which one to use. Please feel free to ask questions in the comments. I'll provide any more information that you need. If you have a brand of paint that you like to use, I do not claim that I've covered every kind of paint. There's loads of extra paints out there, MRP, SMS, this sort of thing. If you have a paint that you really like, please let us all know in the comments. Love to hear about your experiences with it. Next time we're going to be looking at the actual kit itself, the approach that we're taking at the beginning of the kit. So I hope you're going to join me for that one. We're going to start building. It's going to be a lot of fun. I can't wait.